Okay. Buckle up, everybody. It's going to be a bumpy ride here for the next half hour or so. I've not heard this particular passage preached on much. I do remember one particular sermon. Wilf, I don't know if you remember it, but one of your first, I think, times you preached here, Wilf talked about the tongue as a weapon of mass destruction. Does anybody else remember that? Now, we're talking about over 20 years ago. Alfred remembers. We're going to be looking at the tongue, a restless evil. And as I prepared this message, I did with fear and trembling, knowing all of the different ways I have fallen short, not just in my own life with respect to the people that are closest to me, but with my own life with respect to you all. For I am certain that quite a few people in this room have in some way stumbled because of something that I have said to you. I say that not to beat myself up, but to be honest about the seriousness of the topic. So, with no further ado, let's read James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With the tongue, we praise our Lord and Father, and with it, we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. Read to the end of verse 12. Last week, we explored the relationship between faith and deeds. We learned that an essential feature of our faith is that our deeds come from our faith. So genuine faith produces genuine deeds. That was the gist of what the passage said. And I see this week's text as a natural extension of that idea, James moving further, that our words should extend from the quality of our faith, such that genuine faith produces genuine speech. So what you say and what you do should be aligned with the spirit God has put inside of you. Again, what you say and what you do should be aligned with the spirit God has put inside of you. As you looked at the last few verses of that passage, James is making that explicit. And so just as last week we were challenged to evaluate our deeds with respect to the commands of Jesus, this week we are going to be challenged to evaluate how our words align with the commands of Jesus. And as I've been studying through James as we've gone through this series, I'm really struck by how James, as the brother of Jesus, in his very matter-of-fact, direct approach in speaking to the church, echoes the words of Jesus himself. In other words, James is not giving us new information. I think he is processing in a very direct manner what Jesus taught his disciples and what's been captured in the Gospels. So we're going to move through the text, and then we're going to look at a parable of Jesus that I think complements this teaching, because I think on first blush, when you read this passage, your initial thing that you're struck by is, whoa, this is really, really harsh. And so a lot of us, our natural inclination would be, okay, I guess what this is saying is I really need to watch my speech. I need to be better. And that kind of thinking lasts for about 4 days. And then the old man just kind of reemerges and you go back to the way you always talk. And what I'm going to propose to you today is that's not the gospel. The gospel does not intend for you to try to reform yourself for a few days and then kind of stumble back into the old habits. The gospel is transformative, and I believe that there's some transformative teaching that we can internalize today so that we don't have to live out the cycles that James is describing here in this text. All right, I realize that's ridiculous, and you probably can't read that from where you are, but I just want to point out that the first 2 verses of this chapter that I just read speak specifically to teachers or people who aspire to teach. James says, not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know we who teach will be judged more strictly. In other words, if you have an aspiration to have some role in front of people, you shouldn't have that aspiration if you can't control your tongue. And so he says, we all stumble in many ways, and anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. And so right away we have this principle that the things we say are really important, that we can't be dismissive about what we're putting out there when we talk. And so teaching God's word requires a measure of self-control over what we say. Not perfection, but moderation and humility. So right away, we as teachers, those of us who teach the word or sit as someone who's providing the word to other people, and in some cases that's all believers as you share the word with others, you have a commensurate responsibility to be mindful of the things you say. Because if the things you say in your flesh, okay, are disrupting or opposite or contrary to the gospel, there's not much effect there. And in a lot of ways, people might be misled. And it's in these first 2 verses that we learn that the tongue is the force that steers the ship. Okay, so the things you say are, in a sense, what sets the course correction for the boat of your life. The tongue, much like the rudder of a boat, is small. Okay, the tongue is small, but James is saying just like there's a very small rudder that steers the ship, and if you're watching a big ship as it's traveling through the water, you can't see what's going on underneath, but just trust us that that piece that's steering the ship is much smaller than the hull of the ship. So the tongue, in a sense, is what steers or guides or directs, okay, the pathway of the person. That's the principle. The tongue, James says, is a fire. Now, the reason why we can tell also why this is such an important principle is that James takes great pains to describe all of the different ways that the tongue can be damaging. You'll notice for James, this passage is uncharacteristically literary. So a lot of the times, James just says like it is. Do this, don't do this. But you'll notice in this passage, there's quite a bit of artistic license he's taking to compare the tongue in our speech to many different things. And so we should take note of the emphasis. So all of those word pictures that we're bombarded with in this passage, we have to take note. Oh, James is really trying to get us to sit up and pay attention. And so we all right now should sit up and pay attention. Taming the tongue, he says, is like taming a wild animal. The tongue is like a small rudder that steers a ship. The tongue is small, but it makes great boasts. The tongue is a great fire, a world of evil. It corrupts the whole body. It sets the whole course of one's life on fire. It is itself set on fire by hell, and no man can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and a deadly poison. And that last phrase there, that weapon aspect of it. So you carry, in other words, in your body, you carry the potential to poison relationships, poison discourse, poison discussion, poison a church. Now, deadly poison, they don't just sell over the counter. It's, in the old days, like the apothecary, he would have it back behind, and you had to have some special permission to buy it. You've all been entrusted with a tongue that can carry with it deadly poison. It's a sobering reality to think about. The tongue is a fire, the Bible says. Again, the main idea here, the things we say can be really, really, really harmful. And I want to lay out just some different avenues that the tongue can take us that would be harmful to ourselves and to those around us. Negativity, constantly focusing on all the problems, either of other people or yourself. There's a lot of complaining. There could be a lot of really grumbling about things, the state of other people, the state of myself, the state of the world. Negativity is one way that the tongue is a fire. Great boasts, exaggerating what we do to make ourselves look better. And of course, that's part and parcel with pride, that we carry ourselves and we talk about ourselves in such a way that we're presenting a false narrative. And we're boosting ourselves up, often at the expense of other people. Slander, just talking badly about other people, saying things that tear them down, that would ruin their reputation, to make other people think less of them. Lying, misrepresenting the truth or deviating from the truth, stating falsehoods, a lot of times to get ourselves out of trouble or, again, to make ourselves look better while making other people look worse. Mean, foolish, or crude joking. We know that there are passages in the New Testament that speak to Christians that they should not be engaging in this. So lewdness or coarseness, making all sorts of comments that on the surface may appear to be just, oh, I'm just trying to have fun, but actually they do create a lot of damage. They can be mean, they can be foolish, they can be crude. Sarcasm. Clothing our disdain for someone with like a straight-laced kind of disingenuous approach. So saying things in a way that is misdirecting our anger or misdirecting our feeling of superiority in a way that's comical. And if you'd like to know how sarcasm works, unfortunately, I would be your expert on that. Gossip. Spreading things about other people. May be true, may not, may be half-truths, but getting enjoyment out of talking about other people in such a way that, again, their reputation might be harmed or relationships might be strained or even ruined because we feel like we want to talk about other people. We get enjoyment about talking about other people. We enjoy actually saying bad things about other people or divulging things that maybe should be kept confidential or maybe don't need to be brought up at all. And then unconstructive criticism, so a critical spirit, constantly pointing out what other people are doing incorrectly, pointing out the foibles or the weaknesses of others, really harping on things over and over again that aren't being done well. And again, this criticism, sometimes criticism is warranted if it's constructive, so I want to make that distinction. I think it's important that people can offer a critique of something and they can do it in good faith. But unconstructive, again, the point would be tearing things down, showing that other people don't know what they're talking about and you do. There's a whole range of ways that we can engage ourselves in that poison, in that fire. Now, as I kind of walk through that list, you yourself, because you have the Holy Spirit inside of you, if you're walking with Jesus, you might have felt pricked in some particular way that, yes, that is a temptation of mine, or I do find myself stumbling in this area, or maybe the entire list you feel like you have problems with, or maybe you feel like you've got a pretty good handle, you're very spiritually mature, and for the most part, these things aren't that difficult for you. I think James is kind of saying we can be in denial about it, that sometimes we think we don't have a problem, but actually we're not paying close enough attention to what it is we're saying and the effect on other people. So if we feel often convicted about this, obviously in our flesh, the next step would be to self-justify, to offer rationalizations or excuses for why we do these things. So yes, I did light the match. Yes, I used the match to light all the other matches, but I had a good reason to, or I have an excuse for why I did it. And excuse making, I think we're hopefully learning here in the book of James, is not really a Christian's option. It's not a Christian's avenue for spiritual success and maturity to just kind of think of excuses for why you're doing the thing you're not supposed to be doing. So I've just thought in my own heart of some excuses that people might make for engaging in all of these particular problems with their tongue. I call this the bull in the china shop approach. It's just who I am. I put it out there. If you have a problem with that, that's you. That's on you, right? And you remember that metaphor of the bull in the china shop, a very strong presence, big and just moving around and knocking china over and knocking dishes over, and there's plates smashing on the floor, but that's what a bull does. A bull has no regard for all of the delicate things around it. It just is a bull. And oftentimes I've heard people make this kind of statement that, well, you got a problem with it, that's on you. I don't think that's in the spirit of what James is teaching us here today. Okay, I call this the John Schlafly special. I was only joking. Why do you have to take everything so seriously? I hope that I've matured in some ways, but everything, especially when I was a younger man, my late teens and early 20s, everything was a joke. Everything was a fodder for a joke. And if somebody did something that was worth joking about, you best believe I would seize the opportunity to do that. And then I started to feel convicted that, you know what, a lot of people were being hurt by this. I had someone in the last year who shared something that I said to them 30 years ago that really caused them a lot of problems. And they weren't sharing it like to make me feel bad, but I could tell like it really hurt them, the thing that I had said. And I didn't mean anything necessarily that bad by it. I was just making a humorous observation, and yet here we are. The tongue is a poison. It's a restless evil. It's a fire that can get out of control. I'm just telling the truth. I call this the negative Nelly. So someone who thinks they've got like a 100% grasp of the truth, hey, I'm just telling you the way it is. That's negative. Well, things are negative. There is a time for truth-telling. Absolutely there is. And that should be all the time. But the truth is not always negative. God has not created the church to be a negative function. And so we have to temper our negativity, okay, our truth-telling with the love and the gospel. We know that while we sometimes can be faithless, Christ is faithful, and we can focus our attention on him and his goodness. No Christian should be 100% negative. As the Bible says here, a salt spring cannot produce fresh water. That's not how I meant it, which is kind of shorthand for, it's your fault that you didn't get what I was saying. And honestly, sometimes this is, the person has not intended to do anything wrong. Like, I want to be very careful here about this. Sometimes things are misconstrued, and that's just the problems we have with each other in communication. But oftentimes, someone isn't too worried about how things are received because I put it out there in the way that I wanted to, and I didn't consider how it might come across to other people. This one gets thrown around quite a bit. I hear it often when a student really flies off the handle. Well, they're having a bad time. And so I was having a bad day becomes an excuse. You don't understand, I was under strain, I'm anxious, I was going through some rough things. The thing is, the people who use that as an excuse seem to perpetually be having a bad day. And so the circumstances that surround us often become an excuse to just sort of fly off the handle and just blast people with incoming artillery. Choose your excuse. Thankfully, in the scripture, the Lord Jesus has a remedy for this situation that we find ourselves in. Let's look at the parable, and this is, if you were in my forum at camp, some of this is co-opted from that forum, so forgive me if you find it a little bit repetitive. Most of you were not there, so this might be new for you to think about. There's a small parable in Luke chapter 6, verses 43 to 45, where Jesus addresses this particular problem. I think that James in verses 11 and 12, had this parable in mind when he wrote his letter. Jesus says in Luke 6, verse 43, "No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of." This is also taught in the book of Matthew. I think it's Matthew chapter 15. Don't quote me on that, 15 or 16. But Jesus taught in multiple places in the New Testament that the things that come out of your mouth are not just random arbitrary events. There's a wellspring inside of you, and that wellspring, when it comes forth, when it produces, that spring of salt or fresh water comes from your heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. So if you ask yourself the question, well, why did I say that? The answer is because that's what was in your heart. Why is there poison and fire in my speech? Because you have something, I have something in my heart that's coming out of. Your heart, okay, can be a poison generator. Your heart can be a fire generator. The heart is a storehouse, Jesus says. He teaches this in multiple places. He talks about it's a place where you keep your treasure, right? For where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. And so your inward storehouse, your heart, has an inventory. There's stuff in there. And that inventory is on display. So the same way when you walk into Costco and there's shelves and shelves and shelves of merchandise, your own heart has inventory even greater than Costco. But the difference is you can't walk into your heart. People can't walk into your heart and look at it like you can walk into Costco. The only way they can tell really what's in your heart, Jesus is saying, is by what comes out of your mouth. That's how we can evaluate our inventory. The things that you say are your inventory. The heart is a storehouse. So I use this metaphor at camp. Imagine for a moment that a farmer decided that he was going to fill one of his barns with nothing but cow manure. And every day, day after day, his hired hands shovel cow manure into his barn, piling it eventually all the way to the ceiling. At a certain point, the contents of the barn itself start to spill out of the windows and the doorways. Nothing but cow manure, cow manure, cow manure. Would anyone be surprised if at some point the farmer asked, man, why does it smell so bad around my barn? This crude, simple analogy is another way to think about Christ's metaphor of the storehouse. Your heart is a storehouse. Your life is a process of storing up things. And your heart, unlike Costco, is an incredible, capacious reservoir. It contains multitudes. There is lots of room in there. And people are very complicated. If you often ask yourself the question, what possessed so-and-so to say that? People have so many different things going on in their heart every moment. It's hard to even possibly quantify or characterize what exactly caused that. Your heart is huge. And it's often indecipherable if we're not really in tune with the Holy Spirit. There's lots of room in your storehouse. So the question is, what's going in there? Because what's going in here is what's coming out here. That's the principle I'm trying to bring across here that I think Jesus and James are teaching us. So thinking about our storehouse, there's lots of stuff that can get put in there. Okay, there's pride, there's hurt, there's anger, there's divisiveness, there's frustration, there's impatience, there's bitterness. There's room enough for all that stuff and more to spare. And these come from our surrounding habitats, our spiritual influences, the information we take in, and our inner spiritual life. All of those are how we gather inventory. And the Bible often talks about seeds that are planted. And we see that here. We're talking about fruit at the end of James' passage here, and Jesus is talking about it in his parable as well. So these small ideas or actions that we're constantly putting in our storehouse, in our inventory, those are going to reach the ground eventually. I'm sorry, I'm mixing metaphors a little bit, but hopefully you see what the case is here. So Jesus, in talking about seeds, in Luke 8:15 says, "But the seed on good soil stands for those with a noble and good heart, who hear the word, retain it, and by preserving, produce a crop." So this is great news for us. This is gospel news. This is good news. That your heart is a reservoir. It's a storehouse. But Jesus is saying, I have something for you that will allow the Spirit to take control of it so that it can be used for goodness, for my purposes, for the kingdom. If you hear the word and you retain it, you can persevere and produce a crop of righteousness, again, is what is being inferred there. So I just want you to spend a moment as we kind of bring this all to a close to think about the kind of storehouse that you yourself are cultivating. And I believe that there are some things that we can, if you can't control the tongue, James is very clear, it's going to be flapping around, it's going to be saying stuff. That's a natural part of our life. But there are some things that you, when you are spirit-filled, when you are looking to Jesus, when you are trusting in Him, there are things that actually matter that will basically generate that spring of fresh water. Just a list, proactive habits. So thinking about how I can, in my day-to-day walk, in the way I spend my days and my minutes, cultivate a healthy storehouse. My mind being renewed, so when I come to the Scripture, I'm relearning the things that my heart should be inclined towards, and I can confess. You'll see that as the next bullet point there. I can confess the things that are in there that shouldn't be in there. I can sit in silence and meditation. A wonderful way I have found to be mindful of your spiritual inventory is just to sit in silence and think about the things that you've taken in and some of the things that have come out. And I could share a lot of stories of things that I've said that went awry. And my point here today isn't to do that, because I'm sure you all have a category in your menu of memories here that you've also said that you really wish you could have taken back. But when I sit beforehand and I think in quietness about what's in my heart, the Lord can do a work there. Fellowship, being in fellowship, offers us the opportunity to practice this. So if I'm intentional about these proactive habits and renewing my mind through the Scripture and silence, meditation, confession in my prayer life, then fellowship becomes an opportunity to develop these godly habits. So that seed, that's good seed, can bear fruit as I talk to other people. Worship, taking my attention off of myself and putting it towards God. And when I sing and when I pray and when I meditate on the attributes of God and His work in my life and His work in the world, that I can not help but feel enthusiastic about goodness and righteousness. And then my heart is filled, that reservoir is filled with God's goodness. And then, of course, we can be proactive about the bad seeds that we allow into our storehouse. And those could include, and often do, social media, cable news, entertainment in general that is cynical, bad influences, friends who are constantly negative, who, we maybe need to cut off some of those relationships because they're just not healthy, but we do it anyway, or we rile each other up, we get each other going. Like that's going to put bad stuff in that storehouse. That's where the inventory gets corrupted. This is really, really good news, because on the surface, it looks like James 3:1-12 is a lot of bad news. But Jesus has a plan for you and your spiritual walk and your journey and your maturity in Him, where you can, by His transformation of your heart, you can learn to say things that are profitable for His kingdom. Now, you will notice that I have not hit you with a slew of verses about our speech. There are lots and lots of verses in the Bible that speak to us about how we should talk to each other, how we should talk to people in the world. And so my challenge to you is that if you want to take this seriously in your own life, if you feel convicted that you've failed, you've fallen short in being mindful of what you're putting out into the world, spend some time this week considering verses that instruct us about our speech. Alice mentioned on Wednesday night at our fellowship group that Proverbs is a great place to start. Lots and lots of verses about how our speech matters and how we should speak. Christ Himself speaks about it. The Apostle Paul teaches on it. There's lots of places to go. That might be a great fellowship group topic just for people to share some insights and some scriptures around this principle. But in closing, please remember our fruit is demonstrated by what we do, and our fruit is also demonstrated by how we talk. our words impact our spouses, our families, our neighbors, our coworkers, and the watching world, the larger world at large. This principle, this discipline of Christian speech and conduct seems to be going by the wayside because of the mediated method of communication now. Now, our words can include anything that can be uttered or typed or texted. Uttered, typed, or texted. Those all count. There's no text exclusion. There's no social media comment exclusion. We say things, we type things, we text things we ought not. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. God bless his word.